Revolution Radio. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Good afternoon and welcome to Whistleblower Nation. My name is Ella Free, and this is our second podcast of Whistleblower Nation, and I couldn't be more grateful to be working with such an incredible group of people here at Revolution Radio. Everyone has been very warm and inviting and helpful to me, but please bear with me through any technical glitches, as we've already experienced, and hiccups that may occur today. And I want to say thank you, Thomas, for producing the show today. So I guess what I want to do is talk about the meaning of the word whistleblower. In a country where speaking the truth is sometimes regarded as treason, I have the utmost respect for people who stand up to injustice. A whistleblower is a person who makes public disclosures of wrongdoing, corruption, and crime. The courageous people who do so often suffer retaliatory action because of their disclosures. Well, this show is dedicated to all you courageous whistleblowers out there who step up to expose injustices when and where other relevant government agencies and social institutions fail to do so. My main goal is to provide a platform for whistleblowers to share their disclosures and tell their stories. I also want to celebrate the heroism of unsung whistleblowers to kind of help you encourage more and more people to come engage in this important civic duty, because shining light on wrongdoing wherever it occurs plays an important role in keeping society peaceful, free, and just. So that right there is the purpose of the show. And today, we have NSA whistleblower Karen Stewart on the show. Before we get started, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Karen Stewart. She was born in the late 50s to an Air Force officer and his wife. She lived all over the country and in Germany during her father's career. She had a strong interest in foreign languages and art, so she got the equivalent of a double major at FSU in German and Fine Art. When she graduated college, she applied to the National Security Agency to work as a linguist. And what she did was basically translate and report foreign material of interest to the government. And after a stringent background check, she was hired in 1982 by NSA. During this time, she lived in Maryland with her husband, and she worked at the NSA until 2010, when she was railroaded out of NSA just 2 years before she could retire with her pension, because she had dared ask the Inspector General to investigate a matter involving work credit and promotion theft. She moved to Florida in 2011 to get away and wait for the lawsuit, an appeal to forbidden retaliatory firing, to be adjuncted by the Judge Lawrence Gallagher at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in Baltimore. After all of this, you became a target of the country, and that's after so many years of working for the country itself. And I just want to say I'm lucky enough to call this courageous woman my friend. Thank you, Karen, for agreeing to come on the show. And I guess I wanted to ask you really quickly, how many years did you work for the NSA?
Well, it was just a little bit over 28 years.
Okay, that's a long time to be all of a sudden be
it is.
Considered a terrorist in your own country. So I guess one of the things I wanted to do with you, Karen, is talk a little bit about the history of the NSA to people who are not familiar with how they work, and just a little history to kind of educate the listeners on this.
Okay, well, let's see. I would say that I graduated from Florida State. I was sitting there thinking, what am I going to do with a German degree and an art degree? The animation studios were cutting down on what they were doing due to downturn in the economics of the country. And so I started looking at the foreign language aspect. And an uncle who was still in the Air Force suggested that I try applying to the National Security Agency. Now, at that point in time, 1982 or so, people really didn't even know it existed. And they liked it that way. They would nicknamed themselves the No Such Agency because they really discourage people from talking about their existence and anything about them, actually. So I will say that they came out of an effort by the Army and the Navy from World War I to intercept communication intelligence, which is called comment. Now, during World War I, the military was starting to intercept radio transmissions because that's when radios came into being as an effective tool of the military. And from there, you split into the Army and the Navy conducting intercept of radio frequencies, and that went into comment, and then it went into also intercepting electrical signals, which is non-communications, and those two things combined to be called signals intelligence, which is SIGINT. And so eventually, through all of these machinations between Army, Navy, State Department, the NSA came about in about 1952. And they were chartered with intercepting foreign communications that would be of interest to the United States. And they also were told that they were not ever, under any circumstances, to intercept anything having to do with an American, nor even a foreigner on American soil. So if you had, let's say, person of interest 1 who was in Europe talking to person of interest 2, and they both were foreign, that was fine. You could intercept their phone calls or anything else that you wanted. But if you had a person of interest who was a foreigner, and he ended up talking to an American in Europe, then you had to get rid of everything that the American said. You could not listen to him or her. You could not record anything about their side of the conversation or the mail or anything else that you may have intercepted. So it was very strict. And they also said that if that foreigner who, let's say, was a known terrorist, even if that foreigner came, who might come to the United States, step 1 foot on American soil, NSA could no longer, by charter, listen to him or intercept anything that he was doing. So they had to turn that over to the FBI. They had to show the FBI that there was some interest in this person. But since he or she was on American soil, NSA did not have the charter, they did not have the ability or the legal right to listen or intercept anything having to do with those people on American soil.
Right.
So you can see, unfortunately, that seems to have changed.
Yeah, and as we all know, Edward Snowden kind of brought these matters to light, and prior to that was Bill Binney. So do you want to give your opinions on any of that, on these whistleblowers that, you know, were courageous enough to come forward and share this information of these legal activities and these crimes against the Constitution, basically?
Well, it looks like to me that the upper echelon of NSA was doing things that it shouldn't do merely because it thought of itself as the elite and above the law. Now, if a middle employee or lower employee did the same thing, they could go to prison. And one gentleman, I believe he was military, got into NSA and had a very immature attitude, and he, out of curiosity, tried to intercept some of his own emails and things like that to see if he could do it. Well, he ended up getting fired. And he got fired for intercepting communications of an American. And he said, well, but I'm the American, it's okay with me. And they said, no, it's the law, you're fired. So they were supposed to be very strict like that, but the upper echelons apparently were doing things that they knew they could get away with. And as far as Edward Snowden goes, or Bill Binney, I would let people know that federal law says that you cannot merely classify some type of activity in order to cover criminal activity. So both of these people basically were exposing criminal and unconstitutional and illegal activity. So I personally don't have a problem with either of them.
Right. Okay, I agree. When you went on to, in the beginning of this, when you first started working for the NSA, what was your overall impression of them, of this agency?
Well, at first, I actually was rather relieved to work there because everybody around me supposedly had gone through a very stringent background check, so I knew I wasn't working next to robbers, murderers, rapists, things like that. And you actually were, for the most part, able to leave your purse on your desk and not worry somebody was going to rifle through it when you were gone. So
Right.
I actually was very happy to be working with people of supposed high caliber integrity. And everything at the beginning seemed to reflect that indeed was the case. Now, the longer that I stayed there, the more problematic upper management started to seem. Things were going on where somebody was going to reward a friend, a crony, a girlfriend he shouldn't have at work because he was married
Right.
with other people's work. Or in fact, a friend of mine came up with a project, and she did all the footwork to it. It got started. It got great results. And just before the project ended and everybody was supposed to get awards and recognition, et cetera, she had her branch chief come to her and say that somebody above him had requested that since she did such a great job that she move over to another area and start another project. And she said, well, I'd rather do that after I complete the project. And they said, no, we want you to transfer now. And so she very reluctantly transferred over. And then when her project did end, a friend of the person who had her transferred had been put into her position, and she got all the credit. And she got a promotion for it. So we knew things were not looking good for some of the management there. We were rather disappointed with the quality of person being pushed up into higher management.
Yeah, I can see your concern. So maybe we'll fast forward a little bit. What else was the NSA revealing that maybe became bothersome and kind of made you question the integrity of this agency?
Well, I kind of tripped into the really evil side of it by asking about the theft of my work credit and my promotion, which actually was apparently considered good enough to give the person they thought responsible for my work a double promotion. So it was at that point when I tried to ask the Inspector General to investigate the report of a promotion board member to me that my name had been removed and somebody else's name had been put, having done my work, and that person promoted. I asked the Inspector General to investigate whether that person was telling me the truth, had that really happened.
Right.
And that was when the beginning of the end of my career started. Now, other things that were starting to get to me was a kind of a campaign of we're going to have communication superiority, blah, 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 blah. And it seemed to me over the top. It seemed almost exclusive, like they wanted to pound other people into the ground. And now, France, Germany, Russia, everybody listens to everybody. Unless you're an island somewhere where you only have Dixie cups, everybody listens to everybody to gain advantage. Not only gain military advantage, but they gain advantage for their governments to know that, hey, this country is going to be having closer ties to that country, so anything you do to this country is going to affect the other one. And so it'll give you an advantage to know how to deal with people diplomatically. And some of what was a little uncomfortable was getting advantage for the corporations and companies over others with this type of intercept. I didn't feel like that was necessarily national security. I felt a little bit more like that was just plain cheating. So
Right.
that was a little uncomfortable. And I preferred staying in the military arena than that.
Yeah, I can see that. That would seem a little bothersome. So I guess now we'll fast forward a little bit to the point in when you decided to make these disclosures and try to report what was going on at the NSA. Who did you report to?
Well, there's a law called the No Fair Act, and it says that anybody who has any type of concern is perfectly able to take it to either the Equal Employment Opportunity office in that federal agency or to the Inspector General, and that it is perfectly legit that you go through channels, that you have every right to do so as a federal employee. And in fact, at times you have a duty to do so, depending on what it is that you're reporting. So the first thing that I did was actually gather up the evidence and try to ask the Inspector General, who at the time in 2006 or so was George Ellard. I approached his office and told them what had happened, asked them to please investigate and see if my impressions were correct. Was I being told correctly that my work was stolen and used to promote somebody else entirely? And at that point in time, the person who was a liaison to a new office that I had transferred to get away from the old told me that that indeed was what they were there to do, and so he would get back to me. So I waited, and when he got back to me, he had a total change of heart, in fact, became rather threatening that nobody was going to investigate the theft of my work and possible promotions, and that I needed to be quiet about it. And he even came to my management and apparently strong-armed them into trying to influence me into dropping it. And right after that, I was called down to NSA Security Psychological Services. And I tell people, I remember walking in, and I hadn't even quite sat down in the chair yet before Dr. Dina Wyszynski, and I say her name because she's been outed already in the press. She apparently threatened me and said that if I did not drop the Inspector General request for an investigation into the possible theft of my work and promotions, that she would go back over all of the psychological evaluations I had taken routinely for over 20 years. And even though I had passed all of them handily, she said she would find a problem if I didn't be quiet. So this was quite dishonest and unethical.
Well, what was your thinking at that time, and how did you respond to this?
Well, I was furious. I
imagine so.
Furious. I knew very well, because of the No Fear Act, that I had every right to ask for this. And I had indications that this indeed had happened. So I was, rather outraged that I was being threatened illegally. My reaction at that point in time was to indeed confront her with the truth. And I told her, I said, and that was 2006, and I said, first of all, in 2005, I had had a baseline psychological evaluation with the former head of NSA Psychological Services, and he had pronounced me one of the healthiest people mentally and emotionally he had ever met. And this is what I told her. I said, if you go back in my records, this is what you're going to find. So if you want to say that a year later that suddenly I'm imagining this, I said, well, good luck to you, because it's not going to happen.
Right.
So she at that point demanded that I take another psychological evaluation, and I did, and she got it and graded it. And I said, well, what have you found? And she was very angry, and she said, well, it says that you're normal. And I said, yes. And she said, well, I'm going to put down that you cheated. And I said, how do you cheat on a psychological evaluation? I said, that's like accusing somebody of cheating on a blood test. So,
right.
We had some contentious meetings, and she ordered me to come back, 2 or 3 times because of my obvious paranoia that somebody had stolen my work. So those sessions did not go well. And I think what they did was evaluated me and said, oh, crap. We're not going to be able to do this to her unless we take severe measures. And so from 2006 to 2009, NSA Security stalked and harassed me. And I had no idea what was going on. I ended up looking up group stalking or things like that, and I ran into an article or actually a book written by a gentleman who called it Cause Stalking. And he talked about fringe groups who were operating gang stalking groups based on the old German Stasi or secret police protocol called Zersetzung, and that is called no-touch torture. The German word really actually says, it talks about, it means a disintegration or a dismantling of someone's life. And so it means the total destruction of every aspect of somebody's life. And they used to use that in East Germany, I think in the 80s, to totally destroy dissidents without having the populace be able to say, hey, you went in and murdered this person. So they pay people of unethical nature to stalk and harass dissidents and drive them to suicide. So it had a long history, and I found out that KKK had used that, and this has been used in the past. Also, I was told that it was used by mafia.
Well, I'm just curious.
This type of thing has a long history.
I didn't mean to step on you there. What other dissidents do you suspect were also targeted with this type of what they do to you, what you're talking about right now? Are there other famous people that you might suspect? Because from what I understand, Martin Luther King was also kind of a target of this.
Well, if you call it by another name, which is COINTELPRO, then you know that the FBI conducted this as well in the 50s and 60s against anyone who was a civil rights activist and anyone who was a women's rights activist. Now, I think there is a famous American actress named, is it Jean Simmons? And she was a target of this. And so there are a lot of other people I'm sure were targeted. In fact, 2009, when I was trying to find out more information, I ended up talking to Siobhan Gorman of the Wall Street Journal in Washington, D.C., and she said, you know what, your story sounds like the story so many of my friends or journalists have told me about NSA stalking and harassing them using their security personnel because they didn't like the story they were either investigating or had written. So that was the kind of an OMG moment where I said, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one. Right. And so I ended up talking to other people at NSA, and they put me in touch with several others who had been stalked and harassed as well, to include a man who had tried his best before 9/11 to report it to all of the authorities who needed to know in order to stop 9/11 from happening. He had told me, I think it was around, 2009, that he had tried for months to report 9/11, and that they had had all of the information they needed to stop it dead in its tracks, and not one of those people had to die. But he had been threatened, and then he had been fired, railroaded out of NSA, told that he had a mental deficiency, that he was obsessed with World War II and kamikaze pilots, and that he wouldn't drop it, and so they needed to fire him for the good of the service because he was mentally ill. And he reported to me that he was stalked and harassed for almost 10 years by NSA security. He was an unbelievable linguist. He had mastered 12 to 14 different languages and dialects, which you just don't find. I mean, that is pure genius. And they stalked, harassed him, and fired him, and then they kept him from getting a decent job commensurate with his brilliant talent for almost 10 years. And then he said they came to him and said, if you shut up about 9/11, we'll let you live and we'll let you get a job that befits you, basically. And so he told me, he said, Karen, he said, I'm telling you this story once, and then I'm never speaking of it again.
Wow. That must have been so
very
shocking.
Heavy stuff.
That's shocking. Yeah. It's just so hard to comprehend that our own government can do this, especially to the people that are serving, for the country. It's just shocking. When I first learned about it, I couldn't believe it. Were people aware? Some people assume that the NSA is aware of all these type of tactics that are being used, but you yourself know that is a fact not to be true. Because I've heard also it's so compartmentalized. So, it's a need to know basis from what I understand from department to department. Is there something like an underbelly of the NSA? Who do you think is, planning all this? Who's orchestrating all these events?
Well, I will tell you, in the 1990s, after the Congress decided that when the Iron Curtain fell, that everything was hunky-dory, bowl full of cherries, we didn't need NSA. So they sent somebody called General Michael Hayden into NSA in the 90s, and he was told to eviscerate NSA. the world is just a bowl of cherries. We don't need NSA anymore, so we're going to basically bring it down to a bare skeleton organization, and we want you to get rid of as many analysts as possible. Well, they started in on a campaign where if you were anywhere near retirement age, and heaven knows if you're above it, they started harassing you by phone, telling you when you're going to get out, when you're going to get out, when you're going to get out. And, you know, certain people, maybe they can retire at that age, or maybe they have other obligations, like they have kids to put through college. Maybe they can't get out at 55. But the NSA security started getting nasty. Well, what I found out from Russell Tice, actually, was that General Hayden had promoted somebody in security who was rather a dubious character. Well, he promoted him to a middle manager, and then he became the head of NSA operations, which is not to say he was the head of NSA security, but he was the head of NSA security operations. And he was something of a psychopath. In fact, it was very odd that he actually even got employment
hired
there.
In the first place, right.
Right, because they were supposed to get rid of somebody like that who applies and just throw away, you know, their application. Well, a friend of mine named Vicky, who had been working at HR, Human Resources, said that after Michael Hayden came in and promoted this guy, that he, the head of NSA security operations, came to HR and said, all of the applications that you're getting for security that you're throwing away because they have criminal activity or mental deficiencies or aberrant behavior of any type, don't throw them away anymore. I want them. And I would say that after that, NSA security basically started to become an organization that terrorized people. And they would do things that were absolutely insane, that had no cause. And one lady I worked with ended up dating a man who was at NSA, who was the Canadian equivalent of NSA. He had top secret clearance in Canada. He came here to work and on similar projects, so there was no problem with his background. He was not a dubious character. Well, the two of them worked together, and they ended up dating and potentially considering marriage. Well, she got called into NSA security and said that she was cavorting with a foreigner and was going to lose her job, which was insane. Absolutely insane. Never before had anybody, you know, the services work together. You know, people from the U.S. go to GCHQ in Britain, or they go to Australia, or they go to New Zealand, and vice versa. They exchange people all the time on similar projects. But this was just absolutely insane. And we started hearing about other cases of NSA security bullying people just to bully them. And so nobody actually wanted to have anything to do with security, and some of the routine 5-year reinvestigations became events that people worried about. Even though they had done nothing wrong, they weren't sure of what to expect from NSA security. So at that point in time, and like I said, that's in the 2000s or so, NSA security became a terrorist group within NSA. You know, people just had no idea what to expect from them.
Right. So instead of spying on potential terrorists, they became terrorists themselves.
Well, you know, NSA security was not supposed to be spying on anybody. What their job was, one, was to vet people who were going to work there, and then to conduct psychological and background checks on a routine basis to make sure that somebody hadn't been targeted by a foreign entity and had been blackmailed, compromised, or was in danger. So they were there to protect the NSA property. They were there to protect NSA personnel. They were there to protect the personnel so that the personnel could protect the secrets, but they were not privy to secrets that any of us were working on because they did not have a need to know. In order to protect us, they didn't need to know what it was we were working on, whether we were working on the new Chinese tank or working on Russian submarine capabilities or diplomatic relationships between Cuba and Argentina. It just wasn't theirs to know. They didn't need to know it, so they were not supposed to.
Wow, that's just so hard to even comprehend. So maybe we can go back to a little bit about the targeting that you have been experiencing. So what were some of the first signs that you saw that you knew, other than what you were told at the agency, some of the conversations you were having, what started to happen outside of the agency that you knew something that you've become a target of the government?
Well, before I actually went to the IG, I'd start asking questions about the stolen work theft and the stolen promotions. And then all of a sudden, one of the people who was involved in stealing them accused me of leaking a newspaper article that I'd never even seen or heard of. Well, at that point in time, I do believe that NSA security came to this woman and told her to accuse me because she screamed the accusation across the office. And NSA security called me in for a polygraph. And for years, NSA had told their polygraph examiners to start to wear clothes that were not so formal. You know, they had ceased wearing suits because people would get the white coat syndrome, get nervous, and then they'd have to give them 2 or 3 polygraphs instead of one, and it cost them time, it cost them money, just because people were nervous. And so everything had gone very casual. But when I got called in for this polygraph concerning the accusation screamed across a room that was meant for somebody to call in and say, oh, we've got a problem, to trick somebody into reporting me very obviously. I went to the polygraph, and the gentleman in the hall before we went into the room started to scream at me. Well, you don't do that if you want a polygraph that reflects the truth, because polygraphs are based on adrenaline. And if you get your adrenaline loosed into your bloodstream, you can't pass a polygraph even if the only thing you're asked is your name. So at that point, they were trying to sabotage my polygraph, and that time they actually succeeded because I didn't pass much of any of it, because I just was so upset. And I had requested that I take the polygraph another day and from another person because he had ambushed me verbally as an obvious means to sabotage me. And at that point, I was threatened with being arrested and taken to the FBI headquarters in Washington if I didn't take the polygraph. And I thought, geez, I can't pass it because I can feel myself shaking because I'm so upset. But I didn't want to get lost in the bowels of the FBI in Washington either, so I went ahead and took it. And I was contacted about a week later and told, well, you flunked it. And I told them why. I said, yes, I expected so. And so they scheduled another polygraph. And I took that one and was told later, we're going to basically ask for a third. And I came back and took the third. And the woman said, she was very nice, thank God. She was not in on this. And she said, well, I've looked over your records and there's no problem with you. She said, what in the world is going on? And so she said, let's talk before I administer this last polygraph, because you flunked this one, you're out. So we sat and talked for 2 hours about what had been transpiring. Right. So we finally got to the point of where I took the polygraph, and I passed it. And she said, before I left the room, she said, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but you passed it. In fact, you passed the second one as well. So the first one is an anomaly, and we'll take into consideration that you say that the person misbehaved, and it looks like, from what our results are, that you're right. So I thought the whole nightmare was over, but it was not. They decided that if they couldn't screw up the polygraph, that they were going to go for the psychological attack. And then when they found out that I had such a great rating, then they had to go into overtime to figure out how do we get rid of her. And so apparently,
Real quickly, I wanted to interject. I've known you about a year and a half, and you honestly are the most solid and psychologically sound person I've ever known in my life. So it's so hard for me to comprehend that they were, that they would ever try to use that angle on a person like you.
Well, I appreciate that. I really do. And I'll say the same for you too, because you've been through a lot yourself, But this is apparently their one trick pony to getting rid of anybody that they feel is going to be a problem. And from what I can tell, the people they feel are a problem are the honest people. You would think that maybe they would use this to get rid of somebody that they suspected having ties with a foreign country that was not friendly to us. But from all of my experience, everyone they've used it on has been a truth teller or somebody absolutely, totally innocent. I don't know of anybody who was actually a problem that they've used this on. I mean, they used it on Russell Tice, and he was trying to alert them to the fact that there seemed to be a mole inside of NSA that had connections to communist China. And he got basically kicked out the door. So this is highly suspect in regard to NSA security. In fact, after I was booted out, I ended up in 2015 writing to the House Oversight Committee twice and telling them about my experience with NSA security and telling them I do believe it's riddled with moles, because one of the reasons my work and my promotions were stolen was to promote a woman that NSA security was running as a honeypot against upper management at NSA in the Weapons and Space Directorate. And
maybe you can, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Directorate.
For the people who are not familiar with this, maybe you can kind of give a definition of what a honeypot is?
Okay. That is a woman who is willing to sleep with anybody for whatever reason she's paid to. Mm-hmm. Now, what it turns out to be, after talking to other people, is this woman was sleeping her way through the Weapons and Space Directorate where I had been working in order to compromise the management of Weapons and Space, which, as you can imagine, is one of the most important directorates in regard to national safety and security. You don't want other foreigners to have the key to the missile codes or anything like that so they can turn them off before they launch missiles. So this is highly sensitive, even more sensitive than any diplomatic or any other area. So this woman was sleeping her way around NSA Weapons and Space in order to blackmail these men. And I will tell you that the protocol at NSA is if you are found to have had a girlfriend or boyfriend, shall we say, as a euphemism, that was married to someone else, then you were giving two choices. You were told, look, Mr. Smith, you've been sleeping with Susie here. Susie's not your wife. So you can either resign quietly, and Susie too, or we will call your wife in and you can sit here and tell her that you've been sleeping with Susie. Therefore, you will not be subject to blackmail. Now, if your marriage breaks up, too bad, but that's your choice. Yet this woman had slept with multiple managers in Weapons and Space, and nothing had happened to any of them. It was very clear that security knew. So it became very obvious that security was behind it, and the only reason to do that is to elicit information from these managers that they were not privy to. And a little while later, Russell Tice actually came out with an interview where he was saying that NSA security was going hot and heavy into blackmailing anybody and everybody that it could. And I knew for a fact from conversations with people that they had put moles into the offices of congressmen and senators, which was highly illegal, highly treasonous, in order to make sure that this or that congressman or senator did not vote against something that they wanted or voted for something they did not want. So they had already started to compromise American government.
Let's see. That's just so hard to comprehend. And, I guess at this day and age, I am not too surprised by anything. But, in some of these intelligence agencies that are supposed to have integrity, and it sounds like, there's an attempt to have some integrity. Just to hear about the underbelly is quite shocking. And, I think Edward Snowden kind of opened that door, and Americans kind of realized, although there was quite a backlash against him, initially the American people were not on his side, but it seems like there's been a change in the opinion of him coming forward to disclose this information. So that seems a little promising to me, that that the public's open to to being receptive to this type of information.
Well, I'm glad, because I actually had a lunch with a friend of mine who was still working at NSA, and we discussed Snowden. And she said that after that came out, the NSA management said, oh, this is a terrible person. He's damaged, our ability to collect information, blah, 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 blah. He's a traitor, blah, blah, blah. And I said, okay. I said, well, what avenue did he damage? And I said, I know you can't say outside of work, but you can give me a generality where I know, because, you can say, hey, he damaged things for A group, blah, 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 or B group, or, so I would know what she's talking about. And I said, specifically what? Whatever you can say in a non-secure environment. And she couldn't even begin to tell me what specifically had been damaged. She couldn't even say, oh, he damaged our ability to collect against Cuba. He damaged our ability to... She just couldn't. And I said, doesn't that tell you something, where you have been there for these number of years, and during the Snowden, time period when he was there, and NSA couldn't even tell you all what had he damaged other than revealing that NSA was being unconstitutional. They were breaking the law. They were going against the Constitution to commit treason. So she couldn't answer. So I know of nothing that he revealed that closed any of our sources off or got anybody harmed or killed. I know of nothing. All he did that I know of is to reveal illegal and unconstitutional behavior. And until somebody can show me something that has harmed the United States, I have to take that stance, because I don't have information that tells me otherwise.
Yeah, I see. Well, this is kind of going off topic a little bit, but returning to something we were talking about earlier, I'd like to hear about the no-touch torture. I happen to know a little bit about this myself, so if you could share that with the audience, and that these are some of the most heinous tactics I'm aware of to use as retaliation against its own citizens.
They are. It is so evil. I mean, I can see that NSA agents over in whatever country probably wanted to take the legs out from under maybe a very bad guy. Let's say terrorist boo-boo is operating in France or in Morocco or somewhere like that. So they want to take away his power and his ability to function in that area. And so they send their own agents, or maybe pay proxies, who are actually citizens of that country, to go and spread rumors about him. Well, maybe he's a pedophile. Maybe he's a wife beater. Maybe he's this. Maybe he's that. And so they get the entire neighborhood enraged against this guy. Well, obviously he can't operate with people who hate him, and they're actually being paid and encouraged to sabotage anything and everything that he does, as well as watch anything and everything that he does and report back to the Americans. Well, it looks like that is exactly what has been taken and put against targeted people in the United States for various reasons, and none of them good reasons. So it is a psychological ploy where they apparently take whoever it is that they want to target, and they will report them as, let's say, terrorists. And I'm trying to figure out, is it bloating the real terrorist watch list, or is there a fake second watch list that they're using to dupe people into this? So that has not been satisfied in my mind, but we'll say the watch list, no matter whatever ilk it is, whether it's the real one or a second fraud, like a double set of books, for dishonest bookkeepers. But they take whoever it is they want to target, put them on this list, and then they give them to this list to the fusion centers. The fusion centers will inform the InfraGard, or let's say Citizens on Patrol, or any other citizen group that has been created after 9/11, or I should say created after the 9/11 hysteria, in order to tell people, oh, you must, and essentially they're saying you must turn America into a fascist state to protect your own. I mean, they're not going to tell them they're being fascist, but they are being fascist. So they are creating these vigilante groups, secret vigilante groups, who feel so very special that they're super patriots. And then they give them a name and say, John Smith has been reported to us as a terrorist sympathizer, or he is a pedophile or something of that nature. And we're not sure quite what they're telling them. I'm actually writing something now called What's the Lie? Because I'd love to know what it is. It may be that they're telling all different groups all different stories, because they could tell like the synagogue down the street that Joe Smith is anti-Semite, and then they tell the mosque in the opposite direction that he hates Muslims, and then he tells the teacher-parent group that he's a child molester, and then just tailor the lie to whatever group you are actually utilizing for stalking at that moment. So what they do, they use relay stalking of proxies that they are paying with gift cards or other types of services to stalk and harass. They do the same activity to the person, but they change people all the time. Well, that is to make sure that the person not only cannot report one particular person using existing stalking laws, but it's also to make the person appear crazy and to follow the narrative for maybe a paranoid, delusional person, because they think everybody's stalking them. Well, if you're switching people every 3 to 4 hours, let's say you hire a crew of 12 people to hang around that person's house, and if they walk in this direction, 2 or 3 people follow them, or they walk in that direction, the other 2 or 3, in that direction follow them, or they drive. There are relay drivers who follow targets, and they basically surround them, and if the target goes to the middle lane and keeps straight ahead, certain people continue, and then the others peel off and join later. So it's a very complicated relay type of stalking harassment that makes it extraordinarily difficult to not only detect, but to prove. And you do eventually get the hang of what's going on because you get familiar with the patterns of behavior by people around you, even though you may or may not recognize the same person twice. But it's a pattern of behavior that lets you understand that you are being stalked and harassed. Because maybe your car gets surrounded by people who actually don't let you even go the speed limit.
One thing I wanted to go back to, you were curious if they're telling each group of people a different lie about the person. But Bill Binney was somebody I had interviewed in the past, and he said the lie is different at every level. So that kind of, I think that might be the case. And then also, when you're being harassed and followed, do they follow you everywhere? Give us some more examples. I understand they drive around you and there's groups of people trying to, do these, basically psyops on you and, to drive people to suicide. So, maybe give us, maybe just tell me what a day's like for you. What occurs in a day for Karen Stewart?
Well, let me see. I was going to say that essentially mine has changed over the years. When NSA security was doing it, they more followed the protocol of gang stalking. And now they're not so much doing the gang stalking as they are just making sure people follow me with directed energy weapons. But I will get back to the gang stalking in 2006 to 2009 when I noticed that NSA was doing it, because they were doing also street theater. They would have somebody walk outside the house that you may not necessarily have noticed, except for the person walks back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, only in front of your house. And, when somebody is traversing the street back and forth, 5, 10 times, and going only 2 or 3 houses one direction, then 2 or 3 houses another direction, you do tend to notice them. And they may stand outside across the street and yell things that indicate that maybe that they've heard something you talked to your husband about. Let's say, oh, I'd really like a swimming pool, and then this person is across the street yelling about swimming pools. Or you go into a store that is almost empty of people, and then you find all of a sudden, where did 20 people come in? I mean, why is it now full of 20 people when it was 3 people when I came in, and I've only been here 5 minutes? Or you go to a restaurant, and like my husband and I would, every Saturday, we would go out to a restaurant to eat lunch at about 11 o'clock so that we would get away from the lunch crowd. And we would either be the first people there or maybe the second, people there. And then when I was starting to get stalked and harassed, I know my husband would even notice, he said, why are all these people out so early? We come to a restaurant and now it's all full. And I said, well, let's try something. And I wrote him a note the next Saturday, and I said, let's talk about going to this restaurant, but we're going to go to that restaurant. So we did that. And when we got to the second restaurant we had not named, it was empty. Within 15 minutes, it was actually full to capacity, which it never was at lunchtime. But we did that a couple times to prove to ourselves what was going on, and that's exactly what happened. So they will, and that's called swarming. That's called swarming.
Wow, that must be unnerving. How do you think they're communicating with one another? And I take it that they're listening to everything you're saying, every conversation on all your computers. I understand that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So how do you know for a fact how they're communicating? Do you have some theories or some ideas? I know a lot of times in this world we have to speculate what's going on. So what is your belief on how they're communicating with one another?
Well, let me plug this back in. It came out. I would say in 2006 to 2009, I had indications that the house was bugged. We had been broken into, and there was a very strange noise that was emanating from somewhere in the house between midnight and 6 a.m. And it was a kind of a do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do electric sound. And I thought, I've never heard that before. What is that? And it was never really at the exact same time. It's not like it was always at 2 o'clock in the morning or around. It could be 6 minutes after midnight, or it could be 10 minutes before dawn. So I ended up talking to Russell Tice, and he said, oh, yeah, that's a burst bug. And he explained, he said, if you've got bugs in the house, you can get any bug detector from any manufacturer and find an active bug, because it is actively recording. It is active in that the electricity or whatever it is being powered at the moment, so you can find it with a bug detector. He said with a burst bug, however, it is only active. It is passive throughout the day, even though it's recording everything you say on either in the house or by phone or on the computer. It's recording it passively. So you cannot detect it with a bug detector. But what happens is that somebody comes to the side of your house, because you have to be within a yard or two of the actual bug itself, and they download it. And it could be 5 minutes, it could be 20 minutes of condensed information. And then they take it back and then review what it is that you've done or said in the day. And so that's one way of them spying on you. And like I said, that basically happened between 2006 and 2009. Now, the second wave of stalking harassment came when I had moved to Florida, because it stopped in 2009. I basically had been put on administrative leave for daring to report their stalking harassment, which had branched out into poisoning a dog, and they were endangering me on the road. So I finally ended up reporting it. So they had been trying to provoke me for 3 years and didn't manage to do it until they actually killed one of our dogs. But at that point, I do think that they were listening through bugs and things like that and just communicating with each other normally, because it was NSA. And I do believe that with the proxy civilian stalkers that they fooled in my neighborhood the last 3 months of the stalking in 2009, I think it was regular communication. Now, if you jump ahead to 2015, when they had stopped stalking me in 2009 because they were firing me, in 2015, I had my lawyer subpoena information that made NSA absolutely go crazy. So even though I'd moved down to Florida, NSA apparently came down to Florida, and this is from information from a sheriff's deputy who didn't realize what he was telling me. He said that NSA had come to Tallahassee, Florida, and that they were in a secret exercise with the Fusion Center, the FBI, and DHS that had started precisely when my second round of stalking had started. And what I discerned from the civilians they were using, and they were using InfraGard to start. So apparently they have a social network site that they're using to alert all of these little proxy stalkers as to where you are. And this is one of the sites, at least, if not the site, is GitHub. Now, GitHub advertises that, let's say you're looking for someone to date. And so you join their dating group. And if you walk into a building or a room, let's say you go into a restaurant, then the GitHub site will say, oh, look, John is in McDonald's, and Susie, who wants to date people, is also in McDonald's. Let's alert each other to their presence. And so both their phones will go off, and then they'll see a picture of John or Susie, and they'll look around the room and find that they're there. Well, that was happening when I would walk into a doctor's office or to a store. You know, people would be alerted on their phones, and they'd look all around, And then they go back and start scrolling to see maybe pictures. And then I noticed that all of these people would eventually look at me and have a look on their face like, aha, there's that person. And so they would look at their watches, and then they would start typing in information into the site. And I did actually position myself around behind a few of these people, and I did see it was a GitHub site. And one of the people I even asked, I said, so I see you must be getting paid for reporting someone. And the guy looked at me, his eyes popped open, and he smiled, thinking, okay, well, she's on to me, but so what? And I said, so how much do you get paid to do this, per phone call or per text? And he smiled, and he said, $100.
That's amazing. So you had some validation from one of the quote-unquote contracted stalkers, gang stalkers himself.
Yes. And we talked a little bit, and at a certain point in time, he said, well, I think I've told you all I need to tell you. He said, I don't want to talk to you anymore. And I said, okay, thank you for talking to me at all.
Right. Are people around you other than your husband when you experience some of this? And if they are, what is, and I'm sure you've been honest with them and direct, and what are their responses to this? It must be frightening to people who care about you.
Well, it's interesting because it depends. I mean, what we're talking about are patterns of behavior that are 24/7. And so if you're not that person being stalked, it's hard to pick up on patterns.
Oh, Karen, hold on just
when
a second.
You only see them.
So, 1 sec, we have going to break. Be right back with Karen Stewart. Just hold on.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hi, Karen. Welcome back. So, as I was about to say, we're here with Karen Stewart, NSA whistleblower, and let's pick up where we left off.
All right. I believe we're talking about the GitHub site.
Yes,
and I had just approached a stalker. And they had, I noticed in Florida, in Tallahassee, they had the active stalkers that basically had schedules that they followed you by. Maybe somebody was following you 3 hours a day or 4, and then they switched people. But then they had the passive stalkers, which they had told, and you have to imagine that they have to have been telling people in the hundreds or even a couple thousand to watch out for this person. So I would be going places and noticing that people would get notifications on their phones that I was there. And so it had to be tied actually to my phone, setting off theirs. And one of the people I'd asked, about making the call in to report my whereabouts. And he slyly realized I was on to him and then bragged that he and other people were getting $100 per notification. And right. I did ask him, I said, does it bother you that perhaps the person you've been told to watch is a totally innocent person who hasn't done anything wrong? And he thought about it for a split second, and then he smiled again. He said, no, it's money. He said, nobody cares. It's just money.
Yeah, that's some of the responses I've heard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
so I'm with you in that there are several echelons of people. The people who are in Enfergard or the Citizen Corps are the ones who think that they're patriotic-minded and that they're doing something for their country, despite the fact that for some odd reason they have no problem trampling your civil, human, and constitutional rights for their safety.
Yeah.
Now, the other people below them, of course, don't give a hoot whether you're guilty, innocent, or in between. It's just money.
It's American greed, I guess. People do just about anything for money, as we both realize. And I guess I think that
I am sorry to see it.
Yeah, it is sad. It is very sad. We need to kind of go back to the values of America, and that's freedom and integrity. And of course, it is about capitalism as well. But we need to, I think, upholding that Constitution, which is being violated on every level, not just by the government, but, all these subversive groups that are doing this to us as well. So I guess, I think the other thing we were talking about before we went off air for a minute was your family and friends, what they think about this and what their take is on this.
Oh, yes. Well, in Florida, when I was living there, my husband was still in Maryland working because he had a few years to go to retire. And I decided, what the heck, let's go to Florida, get away from the nitwits in the neighborhood who had stalked and harassed me based on lies. And so I ended up staying with my elderly parents in Florida for half a year and coming back to Maryland. And I'm sorry to say, when the stalking harassment in Florida didn't seem to frighten me away from dropping my lawsuit against NSA that's at the EEOC, they started hitting us with directed energy weapons. Now, my parents are in their 80s.
Yeah,
so it's obscene. It's absolutely obscene.
And what do they feel like exactly? I guess I'll let you finish up your thought, and then maybe you can answer to me like what your experience of what it feels like and how it affects you.
Well, I was going to say my parents felt it differently, but I saw that they were being affected by it. At the end of November 2015, I had essentially had kind of a Twitter fight on, with Bill Black Jr., who had been the deputy director of NSA. I had said that the 2 days after 9/11, I went back to work, and there was a man crying in the hall just outside the office, and he was saying that he was an analyst who had intercepted information that would have stopped 9/11. Now, he was a totally different man than the one I talked to in 2009. So this was 2 days after 9/11. And he was crying like a baby. And I stood there and listened to him because he had kept saying none of those people had to die. So, that stopped me in my tracks. And I thought, what is this man talking about? He had 2 or 3 women around him trying to comfort him, but he pretty much blurted out that he and others in his office had discovered the 9/11 plot and had tried to report it. And they were threatened and abused and told to be quiet about it. So on Twitter, I related that story. And then I got attacked by a man who claimed to be Bill Black Jr., who was the deputy director of NSA. And he tried to call me a liar, tried to call me a troll. And I said, no, I worked there, and here's my badge. And so he said he issued another couple threats and then blocked me and deleted our conversation. And then at the end of November, after midnight, the house was hit with, I don't even know how to explain it, but was electrical burning that went through the house. In fact, it put the refrigerator, the dishwasher on the fritz, and then it destroyed the microwave clock, so that it looks like Martian. You can't read it. It never has returned. And none of us knew what the heck had happened because it had happened in our sleep. It woke us up, but we didn't know what to think of it. Got the electrician out there, and he checked everything in the house, no problem. And then we had other people come and check outside the house, no problem. And then it happened again and again and again. So they were hitting us real hard with something that drove your heart rate up from, let's say 140 to 180 or 200 within 10 minutes. And you could feel the electricity in the air, and your skin was burning, and you had high pressure in your ears. And again, it felt like your heart was having either going to beat out of its chest, or depending on the different types of waves, there was one that made it feel like my heart was beating at one rate a minute and having a hard time doing so. So they were hitting us with stuff that was real strong at first. I think maybe trying to kill me, because I had said that about 9/11. So I ended up taking refuge. I went to the opposite end of the house and started sleeping in between a full washer, because the water I felt would mitigate this, and sleeping behind a dryer, which are large metal objects. So, like I said, I went to the opposite end of the house to try to take whatever away from my parents, because we were all waking up with red, burned faces.
Yeah, that seems to be like an indication of it.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yes, it's called radiation dermatitis, frankly.
How long do you think that these, control weapons have been in use?
Oh, well, I would say that they've been working on them in one shape or another for my lifetime, and I'm starting my 60s. So I think to some degree or another, I mean, Nikola Tesla basically was the one who started figuring out how to make this type of technology, which I don't really think he had it in mind as weapons. But I think that after he died, people went in and took all of his papers and decided to keep that from the public and just use it as weaponry. So he was a scientist or inventor in the 1800s. So this has been in the works forever. And I think it was last time they talked about it publicly on TV was the 1970s. And then apparently the deep state decided, no, let's not tell the public about these kinds of weapons, because they might put pressure on the politicians to say, we're not developing this type of weapon, and take it out of our arsenals. And I think they decided that these things were wonderful assassination weapons, not only for foreign leaders, but for anybody inside the United States who seemed to stand against their agenda. So there are several mysterious deaths that I would question as to whether they were induced by these types of mobile weapons. And I did learn from David Galbotz, who is a military intelligence specialist who's retired, that these weapons were made mobile quite some time ago. They can be put in a car, they can be put in a big handbag or a backpack. There are mobile devices, and if you remember reading about what was going on in Afghanistan and Iraq, they would call in people with directed energy weapons, and they would use them to aim against a building that they thought perhaps was full of enemy soldiers. In one particular incident, I remember them saying that there were enemy soldiers, Iraqi enemy soldiers in the building, and instead of going from room to room to room at a high cost to our soldiers, they basically took a sonic device and they aimed it toward the building, and the Iraqi soldiers came out of the building running and as soon as they could, and they had bleeding ears, eyes, and nose because of the sonic devices. Well, right. Sonic devices have been in the news again because they were used in Cuba, in Havana, against American and Canadian embassy workers.
And that's a public story, which can really bring some attention that these weapons exist. And because the public seems to be unaware. And what a great weapon, and I'm being sarcastic, it's some, weapon that you can't see. It's like plausible deniability is built into every aspect of what the government and actually some rogue groups are also doing. This is it's like the perfect crime. I mean, sometimes I'll see something on the news and someone has a heart attack. What goes through my head, now that I'm aware of this and what goes on in our government, some official or some high level person who's retired and they've been known to, speak on things that they weren't supposed to, but they're older, so they feel like it's necessary to disclose this type of information. You hear on the news that they just passed away, and you do a little research and you find out that in some ways they're trying to expose something they were a part of. This Cuba incident has been very interesting, and it's given me a little bit of hope that it's an opportunity to educate, the masses that this is going on. And so, do you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, I would totally agree with you, because they did come out a few days later with some kind of feeble attempt in an article to say that psychologists are thinking, oh, maybe these people are just imagining this. But it basically fell on deaf ears, and they made themselves look like fools. But yes, if you want to get across to any official, just pull out the Cuba incident from the hat and show it to them. But also don't forget to tell them to research the microwave weapons being used against American embassy personnel in Moscow in the 1980s.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good story.
So these are not in fact, yes, and that shows the span of how long these weapons have been being reported. And I do believe there was another incident in the 1960s where the American personnel in Moscow were radiated. So this has been used on the fly for a very long time. So I think if you pull those three things out of your hat when you write to any official, that they may have to reconsider just blowing you off and saying, oh, ha, ha, invisible weapons, yeah, right.
That was one of my next questions. One of my questions was, what, I know you're an activist and you're very passionate about these causes and trying to expose this. What have you done? Who have you reached out to, and what have the responses been, more importantly?
Well, that's very interesting. I have personally about 4 psychologists who have stepped up and said there's nothing wrong with her, which I am planning to use, in my fight against this. And my next thing that I think I should do is get a PET scan, because a person with schizophrenia has a very definite PET scan formation, and the normal brain will not look like that at all. So if you want to prove that you do not have this, that might be something, if you have insurance, to do. But I participated in the tsunami campaign, and I wrote the emails to everyone that I could. And on my own, I decided, what the heck, I'm going to write an email to every single InfraGard entity in the entire United States. And I looked them up, and some of those entities are, they will have maybe a dozen people listed with emails, or maybe they'll have 2 or 3. And of those emails, 1 or 2 are FBI, because the FBI actually created InfraGard under George Bush. And so they are affiliated with all the fusion centers, but they do have an FBI element. So I took my own letter and wrote it and sent it to every single one of these InfraGard people I could contact. And the only response I got back was I got one from the FBI that was obviously a group email saying, it's been reported that somebody contacted you. We're looking into this to see if you're in danger. And I thought, wow, you people are stupid. Because if you see my letter, basically I'm taking them to task for attacking innocent Americans just for their own pride, and just to go about harming other people so they can feel good about themselves. So I've alerted these people, and I hope I get them thinking. I have tried to reach out to senators and congressmen and not been very successful, because the 2 states where I have lived, Maryland and Florida, do not have the best representatives, frankly. I have been told that my recent White House petition, that is still open to be signed, people, if you care to. I need 2,000 signatures by October 2nd so we can elicit a response from the White House. But I've been told that somebody took an interest in the petition, printed it out, and gave it to Congressman Trey Gowdy of South Carolina. But he is a constitutional bulldog, so I consider that a win. And I was contacted. I did the first contact. I contacted a retired naval commander who is not a targeted person, but I ended up sending him the repertoire of articles and interviews that I've done, and he wrote back saying, I know who you are, and I commend you. And so it looks like he is one of these people who is trying to help us by getting the country back to being a constitutional republic and not a dictatorship. So I look forward to further communication with him, and I sent him a few ideas that he might be able to help us with, because he frankly asked. So I have been one of those people who sent some of these petitions like memo to Trump, and I've sent them to various people. And sometimes I don't get a response, but that doesn't mean I'm going to quit trying. Because, I'm not a doormat. You people are not doormats. And from what I can tell, and I'm in touch with, now I have like 400 Facebook friends. And I kind of laugh because I've never known 400 people in my entire life. But when I get to know each person one by one, they're outstanding people, with very, very few exceptions. And some of the exceptions, I think, are people who just have not held up under years or decades
duress, yes,
of this type of vicious harassment. So I don't blame them for it, but the vast majority of people, I would say, are some of the best people you could ever hope to meet and would be honored to be friends with in any capacity.
And very honest people, which oftentimes gets us into trouble. I think most of the people that I have spoken with that are whistleblowers or have been trying to expose some kind of injustice going on, no matter what it may be, whatever the case may be, they're just open and they're honest, and they react to and they respond to these injustices going on. And this is sometimes what we have to experience. This is, retaliation for speaking the truth. We're definitely not a bunch of sheeple, that's for sure. And so many of us walk a different, we go down a different path, integrity and being honest and trying to enlighten people as to what's going on. That's just kind of in our nature, I've noticed. So, but, it sounds like, we just have to continue on and be persistent and, try to educate the public. I think my big goal, my personal goal, is to educate the public of all matters, including anything that needs to be brought to light. We have controlled media, and that's papers and everything else as well. And, not too long ago, I'm aware that they were in bed with some of the intelligence agencies to kind of sway America into certain opinions. So, and people are naive. I was naive too. You just kind of believe what you see on TV. And, but luckily people are waking up. Little by little, people are waking up and they don't trust their government quite as much. But at the same time, when we reach out to other political officials, it seems like they have their hand tied. They may support us. So I just think it's going to take a large number of people who want to stop this. And it's going to take the people having a voice in order for Congress or anyone else to take a stand against, Anyway, so that's my opinion.
Oh, I think so too. I mean, look at the American Revolutionary War. That was 3% of the people who said, no, we're not going to be subject to the whims of King George.
Yeah.
That was 3%.
Mm-hmm. What about, we're talking about whistleblowers, and this whole show is based on whistleblowers. So what protection, are there any whistleblower protections other than some of the, I know there's a couple of them established, but I wanted to get your opinion. Are there any effective whistleblower protections in place? And what are your thoughts on that? What can we do to protect people who are just trying to share the truth?
That's a very good question. I had mentioned the No Fear Act. That was passed several years ago to protect whistleblowers, and it was specifically passed because even though there are laws on the books to protect whistleblowers, they're being ignored. So Congress basically said, all right, these are ineffectual, so we are going to pass this one anvil of a law that gets people's attention and says, no, stop marking people's work as unacceptable the year that they report something wrong. Stop it. Stop saying that people are crazy and throwing them out because they report something wrong. So the No Fear Act was mandated to be taught to every single federal worker in the workplace yearly. You had to go to a class, learn about the rights that you had and how they were not supposed to be trampled, and then sign off that you had taken the class or the agency you worked for got in trouble. Well, that stopped them not one iota. Anytime somebody found something wrong and reported it, they suddenly attacked you with being paranoid and delusional. And I've said, isn't it amazing that some of these places, especially NSA or CIA, you go through such a thorough vetting to include a thorough psychological exam just before you even start working with them. They have to make sure that there's nothing in the world wrong with you. And then suddenly, a few years later, you get schizophrenia with delusions? I don't think so. But nobody seems to have caught on. This seems to be a dirty secret where they put a law in place, and then when they're told it doesn't work, they don't do anything about it. It's like, well, we did our part. We put up a law that looks good. What do we care if it actually works?
And you know what?
So,
I just want to interject something.
Do something.
I used to work in the mental health field for some time, and I worked with some of the troubled youth. And one thing I know is, and they may have changed to resolve this, or to make it where they can use this schizophrenia. That's something that manifests in their 20s. That's not something that someone who's 40, 50 years old is all of a sudden going to be presenting with these type of symptoms.
Right. But they ignore that.
It's bothersome.
It is totally impossible. It's totally impossible. What they're accusing so many people of is impossible. But they seem to forget that. And these are psychologists who work for the government who are forgetting this.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I wanted to do real quick, I'd like to take a couple of questions before we end the interview. So if you have a question, you can call this number, 229-299-5360. Let me give you that number again. And that's just for this week, but it's 229-299-5360. So I'd like to take a couple of questions. And in the meantime, maybe, I don't know if this is too soon to ask you this question, but has there been a silver lining to all of this for you, in your opinion?
Oh, the people that I've met.
Of course.
Absolutely, the people that I've met. And, they've been so kind to me, and they've said, thank you for doing this or that. And then I tell them, I say, you know what? There's so many people who are encouraging me. They're sending me information. They're contacting me. They're trusting me with their stories. They're opening up. They're telling me this, and that. This is not a one-person effort. This is not a 5-person effort. This is not a 10-person effort. This whole community is stepping up, and I am very proud of them. And they are making contributions, and they are just so loving and kind, the vast majority of time, to everyone. And like I said, there are exceptions, but I would say this is, I've met some of the best people I would ever have hoped to meet. And I so desire to see everyone set free and set back on course. I really do, because these people, even more so than the vast majority of just anyone on the planet, these people deserve their lives back. I would take not anybody's life for any reason. In regard to like trampling somebody's right to have their life. But these people are productive and quality people. They need their lives back to forward society as well as continue their own lives that they have a right to.
Yes, agreed. But I also think we need to get people, the public, it's your civic duty. We need you to get on board. And, this station is great. We have a lot of alternative news, and so we need you to support us. One voice makes a big difference. So if we can get enough people, whether you're experiencing these type of, events or occurrences, we need you on board. If you want some information, want to know how you can help, you can email me at ellafree2016@gmail.com. Again, that's ellafree2016@gmail, and we can try to get you involved, and this petition too. I think this petition is really important, Karen. So if you have an address or link, I normally have my links ready, but I don't today. So do you want to share, how to get to those links to kind of sign this petition?
Oh, let me see. I'll have to look it up, because there are two. There's one petition, but it's on two sites. One is on the iPetition site, and the other one is actually on the White House site. I don't know if I can go to it while I'm talking to you without disconnecting. So
no problem. Or you can go to freedomfortargetedindividuals.org. I know that it's on that site. Freedomfortargetedindividuals.org. Just go to current action and events, and the links to the petition are there. So we appreciate anybody who is willing to stand up for your fellow, your fellow human beings, and it's so important. This is a country where we're supposed to be given the right to speak, and it's a country that was founded on individuality. Unfortunately, that's not what we're seeing. It seems like a suppression of individuality, and they're kind of wanting, the sheeple. It seems like that's, those are easy to control. The sheeple are easy. So, it's important, guys, that we get on board and really help all these groups and stand up for all the injustices going on. And if you don't do it, no one else is going to. And luckily, I work with an incredible group of activists. But we need more than a core group of activists. We need the public.
We do, because we're preaching to the choir when we talk to each other.
Correct.
And you're entirely correct that the Founding Fathers said essentially that the rights of the individual must be sacrosanct, because if you can trample somebody, if the majority can trample one person, they can trample anyone. Okay? Mm-hmm. So we're not a democracy, because in a democracy, two wolves can vote to eat the sheep that's with them. Okay? In a constitutional republic, each of them is guaranteed their individual rights. So just because the majority want to do harm to the minority, they can't do it. As where a raw democracy is kind of mob rule.
Yeah. Agreed. Well, let me see. Thomas, do we have any? Okay, no questions today. Okay, not yet. Surprised, because our group, we know a lot of activists, and they like to come in and ask questions, but maybe next week, or maybe they're just listening. But okay, let's see. So we have a little bit of time. I wonder what we can talk about. There's so much to talk about. Maybe we'll just talk about the government a little bit. What are some of the flaws in our government? I just wonder how it got so out of control. I mean, it started out on such great principles, and it just seemed to have gotten out of control.
Well, I've described this time as us being in a post-constitutional crisis. And I have, for quite some time, been harping on a Supreme Court decision that was made as early as 1803. In 1803, the Constitution was challenged with a lawsuit that said, can there be a law made anywhere in the United States or on U.S. territory that is valid, but it goes against the Constitution? Well, the Supreme Court took probably about 10 years to read every single thing written by every valid founding father to assess their intentions and their thoughts in that regard. And they finally came up with a decision that said, no, if there is a law passed anywhere in the United States or on U.S. territory that is contrary to the Constitution, then it is void. So what we've got with the 9/11 crisis was a lot of laws that were passed that were supposed to be just for an emergency, and yet now, how many years later, they're still in effect. I mean, there is a law that says that the police can stop you for no reason whatsoever and search your car and search your person if you are within 100 miles of the coast. Well, look at how much of the country is within 100 miles of the coast. So this is an unconstitutional law. But if you bend to it, then it is law and you are making it part of society. But if you don't bend to it, then you can get yourself into trouble. So how do we combat this? And there is another decision, the Supreme Court decision, that I'm not sure if I have the name right or not. Norman versus Shelton or something like that. I may not have the name right. But in essence, I just found out about it. And in essence, it says that if there's a law passed that anybody with red hair can go and smack anybody with blonde hair and not be held accountable, this Supreme Court decision says no. You cannot hide behind a law that itself is unconstitutional. So guess what? What is being done to us is covered by both of these Supreme Court decisions. So they are not on good ground legally to be doing this to us, even though they say, oh, I'm just following the law. Well, guess what? They can be held responsible personally. You can sue them. Not only can you bring criminal charges, but you can sue them in civil court.
Yeah, I see.
So this gives me hope. This gives me hope.
Yeah, me too. I really think so. So, let's go into some other opinions here. I'd like to hear your opinion on Donald Trump. Good or bad? I'm not judging, because I think that a person like him, who's not swayed easily by others' opinions, that's the kind of person who could probably make some changes. So, I have hope for him, but I'm just curious, what do you think he can do, and what is your belief about him as far as a president and being able to change things?
Well, I will preface that by saying I am very conservative. I am not on board with rhinos or conservatives that basically don't have morals. All right.
Right.
I have two people who have been vehemently against Donald Trump. I said, look, what we've got here is regime change. I said, if you had elected Hillary, whether you like her or hate her, then more or less all the same people in government would have stayed. There would have been no change. There would have been no resignations from the State Department. There would have been no resignations from the Department of Justice. And the Department of Justice, along with the FBI, have not particularly proven to be our friends. They seem to be doing things that are against the Constitution. And so when you take a look at that, then they've got a culture inside those institutions that are not friendly to the Constitution. So with regime change of any kind, you have a change in personnel. And whether they're asked to resign or whether they just don't agree with the new person and resign, you still have openings. And then you're still going to fill those openings with new people who have an interest in making a name for themselves and for doing things right. Okay? You've got people who are going in who are idealists. With a regime change, they want to get in there and they want to make a difference, and they're more apt to listen to you. So people have said, oh, I've written letters for 10 years and nobody paid attention. And I tell them, yes, but those people are gone right to the new people. You don't know who's going to run with it. So whether you like him or hate him, regime change is opportunity until it proves itself not to be opportunity. So I'm asking people to go full out, do everything that you've done before and you got discouraged with, do it again. Because it's not going to, nothing is going to change for you if you sit on the bench and mope and say, oh, woe is me, nothing's ever going to change, why should I try? Well, if all of us do that, nothing will happen. It will never change. But I do encourage people, take this opportunity. Please take this opportunity. And for the people who are Christian, who say, I didn't like Trump, he's not what I wanted, I don't think he's going to do what we need him to do. Okay, go to the Bible and it tells you, pray for your leaders. And if they're not what they should be for you, then ask God to change them.
That's good advice. Good advice. So one thing I've noticed already, he's stirring up the intelligence agencies, that's for sure.
Yes. And I have to laugh because, this isn't really funny, but he's not under their thumb very obviously. And I think that's a good thing.
I do too.
And sometimes I think throwing a wrench into the spokes of a wheel that's taking over a cliff is not a bad idea.
Yeah, I agree with you there. What presidents do you think might have kind of, what is the word I'm looking for, kind of allowed this to happen? Or do you think they're even aware? Do you think it's that compartmentalized that they're kind of unaware? I believe they don't know the exact scope of things. So I'm just curious when this all happened. And, I understand with the Bush administration, there was a lot of opportunities for our government to do things that was, against the law, and that things really changed during the Bush administration. But it seems to go back a little further than that as well.
That's a very good question, because I agree with you in that I do tend to remind people that a new president can be presented with a project and say, hey, this is XYZ project. It protects the borders. It feeds babies. It, picks up stray animals off the street and finds them a home. And he'll say, oh, that sounds really good. I'm going to sign a continuance of it. And it doesn't do that at all. He may, and all presidents might be given a line of baloney as to what certain projects do. And the thing is, they're supposed to be able to trust their advisors. If they have somebody in there who's more so working for the intelligence community than the American people, the president could be lied to. So I think it's up to us when we know something is wrong to try to alert him with all of the means that we have possible, whether it's the White House email or just writing letters, because a volume of letters saying the same thing is going to make an impact. Now, I personally don't like certain presidents and certain administrations. I don't think they were honest, and this runs the gamut of both Democrat and Republicans that I don't like. So I would say we would have to go back rather far for me to pick out somebody I actually do like. But it's the honesty or dishonesty of certain administrations that I have a problem with. And I am not being partisan. I am saying that there are numerous administrations from both parties who have not served us well. And I think this type of thing flourishes under people trying to gain profit from this type of position anyway. They're so involved in self-aggrandizement and making money that they don't watch out for us. And that's what they should be doing. And I don't think anybody's watched out for us for a very long time.
Yeah, agreed. Well, this interview's gone a little bit all over the place, but I'm just trying to think of what else until, I don't know if we have any more if we have any callers. So I'm trying to think what topic would you like to discuss? We still have about 20 minutes.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's a long time. It's a long time.
Russell Tice is an interesting topic. Go ahead.
Russell Tice?
A lot of these whistleblowers. Go ahead.
Yeah, he's quite a gentleman, and he was very brave. I met with him for lunch a couple times a few years back, and he was telling me that some of the FBI, the new FBI newbies, they are training by telling them to go stalk him. So he actually is he's being a little cautious, but he has reported having some fun with them as well. And when I was just getting the gang stalking, here as well as Tallahassee, here in Columbia, Maryland, as well as Tallahassee. If it was only gang stalking, I kind of did the mind over matter business, and I played it back. I would pick up a phone, my cell phone maybe, and say, something like in earshot, "Hey Boris, the meeting, we're going to be, having a meeting at some kind of, far off place that would take a while to go through the woods to get to. And so, it's 3:00 in the morning, we'll meet you there," just in case these nitwits wanted to go trek out in the middle of the swamp at 3:00 in the morning just to discover that nobody was going to be there. So I would do things like that and try to psych them right back. And I also opened up, for cathartic reasons, I also opened up a couple cafe press shops, which is essentially a make your own T-shirt, coffee mug, bumper sticker type of place. And I would put things on there against gang stalkers. One of my favorites, and one of my favorites of my friends and my family, was driving slowly so my remedial stalkers can keep up. So, if you're this big bad stalker and you're tailgating somebody that has that on their bumper, you're getting a little discouraged. In Tallahassee, I did kind of create some problems for the NSA people by putting a link to the very first interview that I did with Cher Zeev. I put that across my back windshield of my SUV so that when they were stuck behind me in traffic, that they'd get curious and type in this rather short link and then read about how NSA was full of criminals, liars, and people who are treasonous to the country. And of course, if you're a gang stalker being paid by NSA to stalk and harass somebody they tell you is a terrible person, and then you read about what a terrible person NSA is and how they basically persecute innocent and honest people, you're not real happy. And I told people, I said, I saw several of them look this up on their iPhone or their iPad, roll their eyes or shake their heads, and then at the very next turn, they went home. They quit stalking me and left. So, if you play it right, you can send reverberations through these people. Now, it became a little bit more difficult with directed energy weapons, but, you can psych these people right back if you care to.
Yes, yeah.
To some degree.
Think that's a great idea. And even like sometimes they may not even know what they're doing. They might be local InfraGard and they think you're a rapist or whatever it is, a pedophile or a drug addict or prostitute or whatever it may be. Having a flyer available to kind of, discuss the matters, maybe just so maybe they don't know. You just don't know. Like you said, they think they're doing something good for the neighborhood or the community. So I think just, again, it's an educational. I think this whole thing could be exposed and what's going on with the government and all these injustices through education, just sharing it with the public, including some of the people who are paid to do these type of things to people.
Right, exactly. I mean, if you're going to be followed and your car is going to be tailed and watched, put a sign on your car. I mean, don't put one that's going to get the police to come arrest you, But I put one on my car that said thousands of people, innocent people, are being purposely put on the terrorist watch list to bloat the numbers for monetary gain. And I had people taking pictures of that.
Yeah. So that's, yeah.
So it is good
great.
to try to educate them. You just have to figure how to do it without opening yourself up for attack.
And then I did get a question. I got a text from somebody that was kind of going through your Facebook. Did you talk about the Fitzpatrick testimony?
Essentially, I found a gentleman who is a retired Navy commander, and he was writing to the Department of Justice and accusing certain people. In fact, I think it was Robert Mueller of treason. And I do actually believe he's right, because I think Robert Mueller is fully aware of what's going on, if not a participant in our targeting. So I saw an email on this letter, and I took the opportunity to email him, and I sent him my repertoire of interviews and articles. And he wrote back saying that he knew who I was and that he commended me for speaking up. Now, I have sent him yet another email, and we'll see what he responds. But he did in the email ask me, what can I do? And so I thought about it a while, and I have sent him another email. And I said, you probably have already spoken with people who are retired military. I said, but do try to spread the news about what is going on to your fellow countrymen, because, you guys basically took oaths to help against domestic enemies as well as foreign. And I had a couple other suggestions, and I said, if you have any comments or any additions, do please get back to me. So that's an avenue that I want to pursue, and we'll see what happens, because that's an in with the military. And so I want to get them to help, rescue us, really, because it's their duty. I'm sorry, it is.
Well, thanks for answering that question. Thomas, I'm getting texts and I got an email that people are trying to call in and they're not getting through. So I'm not sure what's going on with the phone line.
It's Skype.
It's Skype problems.
Oh,
yeah, that's what they use for these shows. So, I guess someone here said they tried to call 4 times. Another person says can't get through. So, go ahead and text me, guys. I'm sorry about that. I don't have the chat room open. So, are you seeing the chat room, Thomas? Do you see any questions?
Yeah, I'm in the chat room.
You are? Okay. So then someone, let's see here. Let's see. Formal criminal complaint against, you mentioned this, Mueller and FBI. Let's see. Yeah, those are the questions I got on this end. Okay, what about, I'll just come up with my own questions then. The accumulation of all this type of things that you're going through, and this no-touch torture that's going on. How is your cycle? Do you ever have moments where it's just really difficult to take, and it's got to be overwhelming? In my personal experiences, it gets really tough sometimes, and it does wear on you. And I guess that's the point of it. And then also, it's the second part of my question is, what about your health? Has this affected your physical health as well?
I would say yes. It's very much mind over matter, and I have never been so pushed as far as self-control, because these are people that are killing you. They mean to kill you. And I have sarcastically remarked that, they might as well make commercials saying, kill your neighbor, get a big screen TV. Oh boy. Because this is a sociopathic insanity that these people are showing. They're showing that they could not care less that they're killing another human being. And some of these people I'm seeing bringing in big screen TVs or going and getting multiple shoes on a shopping spree, things like that. And I'm like, you're killing someone for shoes and a big screen TV. So that's very disappointing. And it's very much a shock to be prey in a society that's supposed to be civilization, but we're not. I mean, there is no civilization that acts like this. There is no predator-prey civilization. So it is a disheartening shock and disappointment in your fellow human beings. So you wonder, what have we devolved into, As far as my health, yes, I have, and I'm going to say only, been hit with directed energy weapons now for about a year. And other people have been hit for years or maybe decades. And I have been contacted by one gentleman who says he's got multiple cancers. And I could cry. I mean, there are people who call me up and tell me what's going on, and I try very hard to be listening very carefully and keep from crying. I don't want them to know that I'm crying. I mean, sometimes my voice will start to shake, or I just have to get in control with myself because I don't want the person to hear it, because I don't want them to get more upset. I'm trying to give them compassion and a logical answer and suggestions, and I don't want to get emotional on them. But it does break my heart. I mean, you become one with humanity. You don't become this individual. You just become part of this group, and it's a group heart that's breaking. And I said, for the first time in my life, I kind of can imagine how God can love every single human being on the earth, because to me that was unfathomable. But I'm getting just a very light sliver of a taste as to how this could be possible. Because it drives home that we are our brother's keeper. We cannot sit by and let somebody be abused like this and not do anything. As far as my health, yeah, I've had significant changes in my health. I started being hit when I was 59 years old, and up until that point, if I was talking about my health, I would kind of joke and say that I'm disgustingly healthy. I come from two lines, my mother's line, my father's line, that are disgustingly healthy. We just don't die until our 80s or 90s, and some of the time we don't die unless we're just hit by a bus or something. So we go on forever. And so I kind of thought that I would have a significantly long life if I wasn't hit by a bus or something, but now I don't know. I really don't know. I've had heart problems, bleeding in the brain, and other things going on that are not slivers in the finger. So we will have to see. But it's not just me. I mean, how are these other people surviving? They've got significant health issues that they never would have had not somebody decided that we were their punching bags and that we were expendable properties of corporate America. So that's an obscenity that is hard to fathom in your soul and your emotions. It really is.
Yeah, truly. Absolutely is. I got a question here about what articles and books can they read? I would say, but this is more on the government side, if you really want to know about some of these intelligence agencies and what's going on, Kevin Shipp has a book, I think it's called In the Company of Shadows. I think that's an excellent book. Then you have Snowden, the movie, which is easy to watch, and you can kind of educate people that something is definitely amiss in the government. And then a documentary which is also about Edward Snowden. And there are various books that are worth reading on this phenomenon of people being targeted by the government, and and I do believe also that there are rogue groups that are kind of taking on some of these same tactics. So there are good books out there. What do you suggest, Karen?
Well, there are a lot of books that I know I've seen that I've said I've got to read that, but I haven't. In this last year, I haven't been able to read much of anything other than articles. So one thing has to do with the NASA plans for the United States and depopulation. If you can find that, it's probably a PDF that you can look up on the internet. So that would be very helpful to know that our government thinks that we're expendable. So that would be good to arm yourself with. And again, going with Kevin Shipp's book, I would suggest that as well. And if you go to maybe Amazon, it'll give you all kinds of other books that are very similar. There are so many. There are a lot that I just would look at that genre and try to pick out what you think you would like to read concerning this. And it's amazing that there is so much out there literature-wise, and yet these people, police and other people try to tell you it doesn't exist.
Karen,
well,
I guess we're at the end of our interview here. I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much, Karen. You've been wonderful. Come back next week, same time. We'll have another wonderful whistleblower on. And don't forget to take action. Don't forget to use your voice and speak up for us. And again, I want to thank you, Karen.
Thank you. Got all the credit, and she got a promotion for it. So we knew things were not looking good for some of the management there. We were rather disappointed with the quality of person being pushed up into higher management.
Yeah, I can see your concern. So maybe we'll fast forward a little bit. What else was the NSA revealing that maybe became bothersome and kind of made you question the integrity of this agency? Well,
I kind of tripped into the really evil side of it by asking about the theft of my work credit and my promotion, which actually was apparently considered good enough to give the person they thought responsible for my work a double promotion. So it was at that point when I tried to ask the Inspector General to investigate the report of a promotion board member to me that my name had been removed and somebody else's name had been put, having done my work, and that person promoted. I asked the Inspector General to investigate whether that person was telling me the truth, had that really happened.
Right.
And that was when the beginning of the end of my career started. Now, other things that were starting to get to me was a kind of a campaign of we're going to have communication superiority, blah, 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 blah. And it seemed to me over the top. It seemed almost exclusive, like they wanted to pound other people into the ground. And now, France, Germany, Russia, everybody listens to everybody. Unless you're an island somewhere where you only have Dixie cups, everybody listens to everybody to gain advantage. Not only gain military advantage, but they gain advantage for their governments to know that, hey, this country is going to be having closer ties to that country, so anything you do to this country is going to affect the other one. And so it'll give you an advantage to know how to deal with people diplomatically. And some of what was a little uncomfortable was getting advantage for our corporations and companies over others with this type of intercept. I didn't feel like that was necessarily national security. I felt a little bit more like that was just plain cheating. So that was a little uncomfortable. And I preferred staying in the military arena than that.
Yeah, I can see that. That would seem a little bothersome. So I guess now we'll fast forward a little bit to the point in when you decided to make these disclosures and try to report what was going on at the NSA. Who did you report to?
Well, there's a law called the No Fear Act, and it says that anybody who has any type of concern is perfectly able to take it to either the Equal Employment Opportunity office in that federal agency or to the Inspector General, and that it is perfectly legit, that you go through channels, that you have every right to do so as a federal employee. And in fact, at times you have a duty to do so, depending on what it is that you're reporting. So the first thing that I did was actually gather up the evidence and try to ask the Inspector General, who at the time in 2006 or so was George Ellard. I approached his office and told them what had happened, asked them to please investigate and see if my impressions were correct. Was I being told correctly that my work was stolen and used to promote somebody else entirely? And at that point in time, the person who was a liaison to a new office that I had transferred to get away from the old told me that that indeed was what they were there to do, and so he would get back to me. So I waited, and when he got back to me, he had a total change of heart, in fact, became rather threatening that nobody was going to investigate the theft of my work and possible promotions, and that I needed to be quiet about it. And he even came to my management and apparently strong-armed them into trying to influence me into dropping it. And right after that, I was called down to NSA Security Psychological Services. And I tell people, I remember walking in, and I hadn't even quite sat down in the chair yet before Dr. Dina Wyszynski, and I say her name because she's been outed already in the press. She apparently threatened me and said that if I did not drop the Inspector General request for an investigation into the possible theft of my work and promotions, that she would go back over all of the psychological evaluations I had taken routinely for over 20 years. And even though I had passed all of them handily, she said she would find a problem if I didn't be quiet. So this was quite dishonest and unethical.
Well, what was your thinking at that time, and how did you respond to this?
Well, I was furious. I
imagine
furious. I knew very well, because of the No Fear Act, that I had every right to ask for this. And I had indications that this indeed had happened. So I was, rather outraged that I was being threatened illegally. My reaction at that point in time was to indeed confront her with the truth. And I told her, I said, and that was 2006, and I said, first of all, in 2005, I had a baseline psychological evaluation with the former head of NSA Psychological Services, and he had pronounced me one of the healthiest people mentally and emotionally he had ever met. And this is what I told her. I said, if you go back in my records, this is what you're going to find. So if you want to say that a year later that suddenly I'm imagining this, I said, well, good luck to you, because it's not going to happen.
Right.
So she at that point demanded that I take another psychological evaluation, and I did, and she got it and graded it. And I said, well, what have you found? And she was very angry, and she said, well, it says that you're normal. And I said, yes. And she said, well, I'm going to put down that you cheated. And I said, how do you cheat on a psychological evaluation? I said, that's like accusing somebody of cheating on a blood test. So,
right.
We had some contentious meetings, and she ordered me to come back, 2 or 3 times because of my obvious paranoia that somebody had stolen my work. So those sessions did not go well. And I think what they did was evaluated me and said, oh, crap, we're not going to be able to do this to her unless we take severe measures. And so from 2006 to 2009, NSA security stalked and harassed.
Revolution Radio! The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Good afternoon and welcome to Whistleblower Nation. My name is Ella Free, and this is our second podcast of Whistleblower Nation, and I couldn't be more grateful to be working with such an incredible group of people here at Revolution Radio. Everyone has been very warm and inviting and helpful to me, but please bear with me through any technical glitches, as we've already experienced, and hiccups that may occur today. And I want to say thank you, Thomas, for producing the show today. So I guess what I want to do is talk about the meaning of the word whistleblower. In a country where speaking the truth is sometimes regarded as treason, I have the utmost respect for people who stand up to injustice. A whistleblower is a person who makes public disclosures of wrongdoing, corruption, and crime. The courageous people who do so often suffer retaliatory action because of their disclosures. Well, this show is dedicated to all you courageous whistleblowers out there who step up to expose injustices when and where other relevant government agencies and social institutions fail to do so. My main goal is to provide a platform for whistleblowers to share their disclosures and tell their stories. I also want to celebrate the heroism of unsung whistleblowers to kind of help you encourage more and more people to come engage in this important civic duty, because shining light on wrongdoing wherever it occurs plays an important role in keeping society peaceful, free, and just. So that right there is the purpose of the show. And today we have NSA whistleblower Karen Stewart on the show. Before we get started, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Karen Stewart. She was born in the late 50s to an Air Force officer and his wife. She lived all over the country and in Germany during her father's career. She had a strong interest in foreign languages and art, so she got the equivalent of a double major at FSU in German and fine art. When she graduated college, she applied to the National Security Agency to work as a linguist. And what she did was basically translate and report foreign material of interest to the government. And after a stringent background check, she was hired in 1982 by NSA. During this time, she lived in Maryland with her husband, and she worked at the NSA until 2010, when she was railroaded out of NSA just 2 years before she could retire with her pension, because she had dared ask the Inspector General to investigate a matter involving work credit and promotion theft. She moved to Florida in 2011 to get away and wait for the lawsuit, an appeal to forbidden retaliatory firing, to be adjuncted by the Judge Lawrence Gallagher at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in Baltimore. After all of this, you became a target of the country, and that's after so many years of working for the country itself. And I just want to say I'm lucky enough to call this courageous woman my friend. Thank you, Karen, for agreeing to come on the show. And I guess I wanted to ask you really quickly, how many years did you work for the NSA?
Well, it was just a little bit over 28 years.
Okay, that's a long time to be all of a sudden be
It is.
Considered a terrorist in your own country. So I guess one of the things I wanted to do with you, Karen, is talk a little bit about the history of the NSA to people who are not familiar with how they work, and just a little history to kind of educate the listeners on this.
Okay, well, let's see. I would say that I graduated from Florida State. I was sitting there thinking, what am I going to do with a German degree and an art degree? The animation studios were cutting down on what they were doing due to downturn in the economics of the country. And so I started looking at the foreign language aspect. And an uncle who was still in the Air Force suggested that I try applying to the National Security Agency. Now, at that point in time, 1982 or so, people really didn't even know it existed. And they liked it that way. They would nickname themselves the No Such Agency because they really discouraged people from talking about their existence and anything about them, actually. So I will say that they came out of an effort by the Army and the Navy from World War I to intercept communication intelligence, which is called comment. Now, during World War I, the military was starting to intercept radio transmissions because that's when radios came into being as an effective tool of the military. And from there, you split into the Army and the Navy conducting intercept of radio frequencies, and that went into comment, and then it went into also intercepting electrical signals, which is non-communications, and those two things combined to be called signals intelligence, which is SIGINT. And so eventually, through all of these machinations between Army, Navy, State Department, the NSA came about in about 1952. And they were chartered with intercepting foreign communications that would be of interest to the United States. And they also were told that they were not ever, under any circumstances, to intercept anything having to do with an American, nor even a foreigner on American soil. So if you had, let's say, person of interest 1 who was in Europe talking to person of interest 2, and they both were foreign, that was fine. You could intercept their phone calls or anything else that you wanted. But if you had a person of interest who was a foreigner, and he ended up talking to an American in Europe, then you had to get rid of everything that the American said. You could not listen to him or her. You could not record anything about their side of the conversation or the mail or anything else that you may have intercepted. So it was very strict. And they also said that if that foreigner who, let's say, was a known terrorist, even if that foreigner came, who might come to the United States, step one foot on American soil, NSA could no longer, by charter, listen to him or intercept anything that he was doing. So they had to turn that over to the FBI. They had to show the FBI that there was some interest in this person. But since he or she was on American soil, NSA did not have the charter, they did not have the ability or the legal right to listen or intercept anything having to do with those people on American soil.
Right.
So you can see, unfortunately, that seems to have changed.
Yeah, and as we all know, Edward Snowden kind of brought these matters to light, and prior to that was Bill Binney. So do you want to give your opinions on any of that, on these whistleblowers that, you know, were courageous enough to come forward and share this information of these legal activities and these crimes against the Constitution, basically?
Well, it looks like to me that the upper echelon of NSA was doing things that it shouldn't do merely because it thought of itself as the elite and above the law. Now, if a middle employee or lower employee did the same thing, they could go to prison. And one gentleman, I believe he was military, got into NSA and had a very immature attitude, and he, out of curiosity, tried to intercept some of his own emails and things like that to see if he could do it. Well, he ended up getting fired. And he got fired for intercepting communications of an American. And he said, well, but I'm the American, it's okay with me. And they said, no, it's the law, you're fired. So they were supposed to be very strict like that, but the upper echelons apparently were doing things that they knew they could get away with. And as far as Edward Snowden goes, or Bill Binney, I would let people know that federal law says that you cannot merely classify some type of activity in order to cover criminal activity. So both of these people basically were exposing criminal and unconstitutional and illegal activity. So I personally don't have a problem with either of them.
Right. Okay, I agree. When you went on to, in the beginning of this, when you first started working for the NSA, what was your overall impression of them, of this agency?
Well, at first, I actually was rather relieved to work there because everybody around me supposedly had gone through a very stringent background check, so I knew I wasn't working next to robbers, murderers, rapists, things like that. And you actually were, for the most part, able to leave your purse on your desk and not worry somebody was going to rifle through it when you were gone. So
Right.
I actually was very happy to be working with people of supposed high caliber integrity. And everything at the beginning seemed to reflect that indeed was the case. Now, the longer that I stayed there, the more problematic upper management started to seem. Things were going on where somebody was going to reward a friend, a crony, a girlfriend he shouldn't have at work because he was married
Right.
with other people's work. Or in fact, a friend of mine came up with a project, and she did all the footwork to it. It got started. It got great results. And just before the project ended and everybody was supposed to get awards and recognition, et cetera, she had her branch chief come to her and say that somebody above him had requested that since she did such a great job that she move over to another area and start another project. And she said, well, I'd rather do that after I complete the project. And they said, no, we want you to transfer now. And so she very reluctantly transferred over. And then when her project did end, a friend of the person who had her transferred had been put into her position, and she